If you want to be a better interviewer, apparently my best tip is to close your eyes, to eliminate that visual distraction and really let yourself pay attention to what the people are saying.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
What's up, podcaster? It is your host, Adam A. Adams. And today I've got Kevin Lowe, who's done 178 episodes on the podcast. He does a combination of some solo. Some of them are going to be interview, just like you hear on this podcast. I want to talk about what he's doing with his podcast. It's called Grit, Grace, and Inspiration with Kevin Lowe. And he seems like the type of person who stays on top of anything that he does. So, for example, he's been doing like 2 episodes a week. And I looked at it, and as we're recording, one came out yesterday, another one came out a few days before that, another one came out a few days before that. And so he's being really consistent. I want to understand what tips, tricks, and strategies that he's gained through his 178 episodes that are going to affect you, that are going to help you with what you're doing. Also, random fact that I think is interesting. Kevin probably wants to avoid it. He's like, why does everybody care about that? I don't know. But he's completely blind, and he's also doing the show. And so I might have some questions about, like, how do you overcome certain things that if you see, it's kind of like automatic. And so I might just be curious. That may come into play, and I might get some feedback on him and how he interviews people, even with being blind as well. So I thought that was crazy interesting. We are recording video and audio. So if by any chance you are on YouTube or something, you will see the video. And if you're just on the podcast, it'll just be an audio experience like it really normally is and normally should be. So let me ask Kevin, I'm going to start here. Kevin, you mentioned that you record some that are interview, some that are solo. Let me ask you, why do you do some that are interview, some are solo? Why don't you choose one or the other?
Well, a podcaster, realize I have a lot to say. And really the main point for me is doing the interviews. I love it because you get this opportunity to meet people, to share their stories, but I don't really get to kind of paint myself as the expert. And so by me being able to do some solo episodes as well, for one thing, it gets the audience to know me, just me, instead of me always interviewing the expert. And therefore, it kind of puts that, goodness, kind of marketing me as the professional with me being a coach. So
okay, because you're a coach. And yes. Yeah, no, I love that. And I think we should stay on that for a second. So you got the podcast. And again, it's called Grit, Grace, and Inspiration. The link's in the show notes for the listener so they could just pull down. It's about keeping a positive mindset, how to be happy, inspiring stories, motivational talk, self-help. And Kevin's talking about how one of the reasons why he does solos is because he needs to let the listener know who he is, like that he is an expert, what his personality is, so they can get to know him. And I bet you, Kevin, I'm just going to ask you if you've had this ever happen. You get on a call with a potential client and they tell you something like, I'm a fan. It's crazy to see you in person or to be talking to you when I feel like I know you already because I listened to some number of your episodes. Do you ever have that where someone says something like, I was listening to your podcast for a while before today, before I'm actually talking to you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. All the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So when that happens, do you feel like because you do the solo episodes, that it's kind of a benefit? It's a benefit to you and that relationship versus if you were only interviewing people?
Oh, yeah, 100%. And I think the funny thing is, myself, I get excited the most about the interview episodes because it's like this really cool guest with their awesome story. But really, people really want to hear like our story and they want to hear from us directly. And so it always surprises me when people comment about, oh man, I loved like your episode, the solo episode you did last time. Like, oh, okay, well, what about the interview? You know, so yeah.
I'm curious about that and how you go about having your story on the solo episodes, because if I was a completely brand new podcaster, I never did it before and I didn't really know how it works, I certainly would have the question right now, Like, are the solos supposed to be the same story every time? Are the solos supposed to be the same story but different chapters? Or are the solos supposed to be just random, different stories that have learning lessons along the way? What do you think?
Yeah. So the way that I work it for my own show is each solo episode is me really like either diving in deep into a topic, or most of the time it's teaching something. And in amongst of me teaching or sharing this insights on a topic, I incorporate pieces of my story in with it. So that way Perfect. It kind of helps to relate it back to me, just that my own personality, my own flavor, my own flair that people are getting used to.
I love it. And it lets them get to know you, like you said before. I'm thinking through something that just came to mind random. Just like I said, I might have questions about blindness just at random. Here comes one. I've heard or seen on TV or movies that somebody who has like not got their sight or maybe not have their hearing, their other senses are stronger. And I want to go there for a second. And I'm just curious what you think.
Yeah, 100%.
Because you are blind, do you feel like the audio quality needs to be a certain way? Do you hear people's emotions better on the other side? What happens to you as a host being blind? What changes do you think might be different between somebody who sees and you?
Yeah. So first I'll answer like the audio quality aspect of it. Being blind makes me one picky little blind guy when it comes to audio quality. And so I can give people a break when I'm listening to other podcasts, but my podcast, the audio quality's got to be right on par. And so when I've had those technical mess ups happen, when things have met and the audio quality's not as great, oh my gosh, I cringe releasing that episode. And yet people are like, Kev, it sounds great. And I'm like, oh my gosh, close your eyes and listen to it. It's horrible.
Close your eyes and listen to it.
But as far as the conversations, I think being blind, I don't think I even realized that maybe I hear people better, that I listen to people more, that I see parts of people's stories more. I don't think I ever realized that until I started a podcast. And I started doing these interviews, and I would have these in-depth interviews with people. In every single interview, people would tell me either during the recording or at least afterwards, they would say, you ask questions that no one else has ever asked me. Or they say, they're like, you see parts of my story that no one else sees but my counselor. And I'm like, you should really start being interviewed by more blind people, because it's perfectly clear why I would ask the questions that I did, but apparently it's not. And so that's what I always tell people. If you want to be a better interviewer, apparently my best tip is to close your eyes, to eliminate that visual distraction and really let yourself pay attention to what the people are saying.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And so to be honest, when I do some interviews, when the person isn't really willing to go deep into their story, it kind of frustrates me a little bit, because I'm like, come on, like open up. Like I can tell there's something in between the lines here. And like I said, man, ever since going blind, you find little gifts, you find little things. And I'm like, that's one of the greatest gifts to me about has happened because of going blind was being able to hear people better.
You're saying going blind. You weren't born blind.
No, sir. No,
okay. Give me this story.
Yeah. So back this year, we're in 2023. This year will mark 20 years since I became blind. So that was back in 2003. At the time I was a junior in high school, 17 years old, living my best life, had a big 4-wheel drive Ford F-150 pickup truck, rode dirt bikes, 4-wheelers, all the things, living my best life, when all of a sudden found out that I had a brain tumor. Now, thankfully, the brain tumor was not cancerous, but was literally found right in time, because they gave me 6 months to live if this tumor was not removed. Went into surgery to have the tumor removed with the thought process that everything was going to be fine, because that's what we were told. I was told that I would have this brain tumor removed. I'd be out of school for about a month. I'd go back. Everything would be fine. The biggest problem to me was that the neurosurgeon told me I could not ride my four-wheeler for 6 months. And for me, that was a big deal. Yeah. And instead, nothing went as planned. And instead, I went into that surgery, came out of that surgery with the tumor successfully removed, life saved. But about 2 days later, I awoke and I don't remember any of this time. Things had all went wrong. That's when they realized I was left completely blind.
But it was 2 days after.
Yeah, it was because I was still asleep.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay. So it wasn't like the surgery was over and you could see for a couple of days, but then it went away.
Literally, I went into that surgery seeing, came out to be left completely blind.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was, like I said, almost 20 years ago. Like I said, I mean, a complete life changer. I mean, everything that I ever knew, loved, dreamed about was taken from me in an instant. And I literally had to learn how to love life again. And it took a while.
And so when you do coaching, tell me about your client. What's an example of the type of person that you help with coaching?
Yeah, it's the person who is really kind of come to that point in their life when they've had some stuff happen, whether it was a disability, a diagnosis, a divorce, a traumatic event, as I say, kind of open their eyes and they want more out of life, but they not sure how to make it happen, how to get there. And so I'm able to be that person to help them through it, to help figure out what they really love, what they really want out of life. And a lot of times that's a career change. That's something big to be able to finally kind of use what they had went through to now be a fulfillment in their life. Little hint, hint, wink, wink. It was basically me 10 years ago.
Yeah, so, got it. Yeah. I like that. And that's a good thing to point out. I think that many of the people that start a podcast is for growing their coaching. I think that they were that person 3, 6, 10, 20 years ago. I think that happens a lot. That is for me. It's like when I coach people who podcast, it's coaching that person who I was as I was learning to podcast and kind of doing it wrong. And it's like, I don't want to go through that. I don't want anyone else to have to. And I know the tools and tips that can like streamline it a little bit to help somebody who's getting in now to make sure that they get noticed and things like that. And so,
I think the important thing too that I would like to share with somebody is like, you don't have to have it all figured out. Like when you start a podcast, to be honest, when I started my podcast at the time, I was a home-based travel agent. And so I started it thinking that it was going to be all about travel. Well, then kind of created itself into what it is today. And literally through the podcast is what led me into the realm of coaching. And so it's this amazing kind of transformation. And I think that's just like the power of podcasting.
Got a couple questions around consistency. First, what year did you launch the podcast?
May of 2020.
Okay. May of 2020. And it was originally during when you were doing the travel business, but the travel kind of shut down in May. And so you figured out how to transition it or what?
So the travel business took the nosedive into the shallow end of the swimming pool in March. And we were all stuck in quarantine. And I had started with the plan that I was going to finally start a YouTube channel. And then I ordered all the film equipment. And then I realized like, Kevin, whoa, what are you doing? You can't do this by yourself. You got to have somebody who can see. And so my hopes and my dreams of being the next YouTube sensation were totally crushed. And then my sister's like, why don't you do a podcast? And I'm like, what's a podcast? And she tells me, and I'm like, well, that's a lame alternative to a YouTube channel. But much did I know, I finally realized, Kev, bro, you were made for this. The world of audio, where everybody who listens to a podcast is blind. You know, everybody only sees what they hear.
So I'm going to get into the consistency thing because I am curious about it. You're talking about everybody who goes to the podcast is essentially blind since there's no video. Does that mean you don't use the video when you record on your own?
I don't.
Okay. And so today I'm recording with video. And in the beginning, I remember you were like, hey, is my video working? Like, I don't know. So you tell me, is video on? Is it showing from over here? But you don't record with video. Another question, if you're interviewing somebody, do you have video on or off when you're interviewing them?
Off.
Okay.
Off.
And I think it's interesting. And I look at the person, like I'm looking at you now.
Yeah.
And I try to see, like, are you about to take a breath? Does it look like you're about to say something? Are you shaking your head yes or no?
Uh-huh.
And it seems to help me to be a better interviewer. Even if I wasn't going to use the video, I feel like I can connect easier with that other person. And for you, like you've had the experience, not in podcasting necessarily, but of seeing and not being able to see. If I was a listener who had sight available, do you think I should have the video on like Adam Adams does? Or do you think it's kind of better to just have no video like Kevin does, if you had the choice?
Yeah. My thing is with it is I always joke and I say that you sighted people, you sightlings, you like to use your eyes so much, it's ridiculous. And so I always laughed with the whole video thing. And I say to people, I'm like, you hear so much more if you turn off the video. And I can tell you that I've had some people who I've interviewed through my journey of the podcast who, when they get on the podcast and they realize we're not using video, apparently they did not read notes that I said there's no video. And they get on there and they realize it and they get upset at first. And of course, I try to break the ice with something silly. And I always tell them, Mike, listen, think about it. Isn't it a little bit creepy? I can't see you, but you get to stare at me sitting in my dark little recording studio. And, so I make light of it, try and make them laugh. But here's the ticket, is that most of those people, by the end of the interview, they will say to me after the fact, that was really awesome. They're like, you asked me questions that I don't normally hear. They're like, and there was a way that I was just able to kind of put my guard down. I didn't have to worry about, was I looking good on camera and be nervous? Yeah. They were able to be at ease.
That's cool.
So I think there's power in it. And I don't know, the video component is just one more component. I mean, I recognize its ability to reach further, but I'm like, whoo, baby. It's one thing for me to do video when I'm being interviewed on another person's show, but for me to have to worry about video all the time, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that piece that you mentioned a moment ago, where during the interviews that you're having on the podcast, a lot of times that they say at the end, like, that was good. You asked great questions. It seems like that would be a strength in your coaching as well. Because not only have you been through it, you seem to have like a knack for listening and understanding and reading between the lines. And I think that could really help for coaching. But I do want to get into the consistency thing.
Yeah.
You said May of 2020, and it was kind of started for a different reason. You kind of had a different job. It went to the pooper after somehow, and you organically started doing more coaching, and that's where it is now. But I got a question about the consistency. Like, you're doing it 2 days a week. So it seems I can conclude that consistency is important to you. But I want to ask, why is consistency important to you? And do you think anything bad would happen if another podcaster who's listening now and about to launch their podcast or has had their podcast, would anything bad happen to them if they weren't consistent? So basically, just let us know, why is consistency important?
Yeah, absolutely. Why? I think the important thing to know is I'm doing twice a week. It doesn't have to be twice a week. It can be once a week, as long as you have that consistency, like we're talking about. And I think that is because we have to realize that we may think that, our show is little. Maybe we're not reaching the amount of people we want to, but we are reaching people. I don't care if it's 5 people. Those 5 people a week are tuning in, just like you tune into your favorite show that comes on TV. And I can tell you one thing, when I'm into a series on TV and all of a sudden 1 week it doesn't come on, I'm mad. I'm like, what the heck? What's going on? I mean, we kind of, in a sense, if you think about it, I mean, we're putting it out there. We kind of have a responsibility to our audience that we've got them trained to know that we got an episode coming out every Tuesday and Thursday. Well, by golly, we better be sure that we got an episode coming out every Tuesday and Thursday. Otherwise, what is that going to leave in their mind? Either the show isn't reliable and maybe I need to find something different. I guess kind of ruins that trust factor, which we're in these people's ears every single week. We're building trust. We're building that know, the like. And if we start skipping out, if we're hazarding our release schedule, you have to kind of think like, what does that say about us? And what do people start thinking? They probably aren't viewing us as a professional who they're tuning into.
Yeah. And especially if you've got a coaching program or something like for you, you've got a coaching program. For me, I do. So on my end, I help podcasters. And so it's like, if I don't show up, I absolutely would feel like I was letting them down. And so there would be two parts. And I think you said both. There would be, I'm letting them down and I shouldn't. Like they come here and now they're going to have to find another show because I didn't produce anything. So there's a bit of that responsibility. And just, I care about the listener. I really want to help them. And then on the second part, it's the trust, trust. And if I'm not going to even show up on my podcast, which I might have a good excuse not to. I might be sick. I might be out of town. I might be really busy. I might have the holidays. Who knows? I might go and get a surgery on my brain. You don't know. Exactly. But if I let them down in a way that I could be putting out the content, but they miss it, I feel like it's hard for them to trust me and my company and if I'll be around. But if they see, 178 episodes like you have today, or if they have 50 episodes and it keeps going, or 700 episodes, if they can see that it's being consistent, I think that they can believe in me easier. I think it's much easier for them to trust me, know, like, and trust, just like you said. Yeah. I'm curious though, because I think we could play devil's advocate, and I want you to do it if you don't mind.
Okay.
And because I've had a lot of clients come to me and they believe in self-care. So they really believe in self-care and they feel like, well, what if I don't want to publish an episode? I'm just not going to. I'm not going to publish an episode when I don't want to. That goes out of integrity. What if our listener hears that it's important for the two reasons, but for some reason they've got this in the back of their mind that it's okay to give myself grace? Your podcast is called Grace and Inspiration. And they're saying it's okay to give myself grace. I don't feel like doing a podcast episode today. Probably wouldn't come across very happy or healthy if I did it today. I need to go on vacation. I need to take a break from it. But like they've got this person, Kevin, who just told them, you've got a responsibility to your listener. And so they're kind of juggling, like, do I do it when I don't want to? Or do I don't do it because I don't want to? What do you think?
Oh, man, good question. And as a guy who went blind, as a guy who has many medical complications that still plague me today as a result of that brain tumor, I understand that not every day is perfect. And I understand that there's a lot of days when we wake up and we're just not in the mood. We're just not feeling it. Or we legit just physically aren't well. Well, you know what? Even though the podcast is important, you are even more important. So if it's going to be a negative effect on you to sit down and record a podcast, then don't do it. But I can tell you from my own experience that for me, I love it so much and I'm passionate about it so much that even on days when I don't feel real good, when I sit down and I record an interview, and my interviews are long, generally about 60 to 90 minutes, I can tell you what, 9 out of 10 times I come out of that interview feeling even better. And so I think that's the biggest thing of why are you doing it? Do you love it? Do you not love it? And sometimes if you're just getting started, you got to put in the reps to even understand if you truly do love it or not. Yeah. For myself, I'll tell you, I mean, yeah, it wasn't always easy. There were times when I had talks with my editor who I'm like, I don't know that I want to keep doing this. And she's like, Kevin, you got to keep doing this. You're good at it. And I kept doing it. And so I feel like that is the biggest thing. You are the number one priority. But
Kevin, why did you not want to? Why did you have that conversation with her?
I think it was early on in my journey, and I had just gotten to a point where I was getting just frustrated with the growth and kind of wondering.
Is it because it was like going slower than you were expecting and you were like, F it. I'm not going to pour all my time and energy into this. Like, I'm just going to quit. Is that what it was?
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. Yeah. Okay. And thank goodness I had somebody there to talk me off the cliff. And she's like, Kevin, I'm telling you, just keep doing it.
Yeah.
And you know what? And I think that's the thing is whether it's podcasting or anything, even if we love it, we're going to hit speed bumps.
Yeah.
And sometimes we just need that friend who's going to pull us over that speed bump. And then you get so thankful that you did it.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple things to the listener. If you're going through something, it's going to be a negative effect for you to have to record today, then, give yourself that grace. And then you mentioned put in the reps. And I thought to myself, it's kind of like the gym. Like your podcast is kind of like the gym. Because you mentioned how you would do an interview anyway. And at the end of the interview, you felt good. And I know that a lot of people, I'm one of them, and most of the time I'm this person, where I'm like, I'm just not in the mood to go to the gym. I identify as someone who works out pretty regularly, but there are days that I just don't really feel like it. I feel tired, or I feel sore, or I feel like I've got other things happening. A number of excuses not to record that podcast, a number of excuses not to go to the gym today. And on the days that I go to the gym, I enjoy it. I might not think that I'm going to enjoy it. I might not think that I'm in the mood. But then when I head up there and start to sweat or start to get my blood pressure going and feeling that pump, looking in the mirror and saying, I look great, I leave being like, I'm really glad I came in today, even though I didn't really want to. And it sounds like you do that. You put in the reps at the microphone.
Yeah.
You're just like, man, I'm not in the mood. I don't really feel like it, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. And then you kind of feel better after, just because you got into that rhythm. I think that's good for the listener to hear. And I also want to talk a little bit about a strategy that the listener might be able to implement in order to be able to do both. Because Kevin's saying, if today you don't feel like you want to go to the gym, or if today you don't feel like you want to record that podcast, don't. Go ahead and you can choose not to. I'm wondering, how can we make sure that you have enough episodes that your listener never has to go through not seeing you, and giving you the grace and the time and the effort to take a week or 2 weeks off, or a month off for Christmas, for Thanksgiving? How do we do that? And so I do have a suggestion. Kevin, I hope you don't mind if I pour this out just real quick.
Yeah, please.
Record more than you produce. Make more content every week than you really need. For me, today, I'm going to look at my calendar real quick. I'm recording 4 podcasts, 4 podcast episodes today. And that's today on a Wednesday. And every day on a Wednesday, I'll record between 2 and 6. And guess how many I produce? I produce 1 of those a week. So I basically got months in the can of interviews. The hard part for me is that every other episode's a solo episode. And so last week, I sat there for about an hour and I recorded 6 different solo episodes. And every now and again, my team will say, hey, we need more solos. And I'll try to batch them. Try to think of some things, some ideas, some questions that people have brought to me, coaching clients have brought to me, potential coaching clients on our discovery calls have asked. And I'll write some down and I'll be like, I'll address these 6 things and I'll do them short. So what I'm saying is, I think Kevin's right about your know, like, trust factor, and being a coach, being a mentor, raising capital. If you raise capital for your real estate stuff and you can't even produce a podcast on time, how can you give your quarterly distributions on time? How can you make sure that you're doing your taxes for everybody? How can you make sure that you're doing maintenance on your property? So your listener or your passive investor will not trust you. Your coaching client will not trust you. If you're a real estate agent and you sell houses and you can't even show up on time twice a week or once a week or 5 times a week or whatever you agree to, you commit to, then, and it's sporadic, I'm not going to do business with you. I'm not going to let you buy and sell my houses. I'm not going to let you coach me. I'm not going to put my money with you. So record more than you produce on a regular basis. So you always have weeks or months of content. So if you hit that day where you're like, my voice didn't work yesterday, my voice was a lot worse than this, I've got a cold. And I canceled a couple of appointments because I couldn't record. So I think it's important to go ahead and be consistent, but maybe you can find a trick to make sure that that can happen and give yourself the grace to chill when you really do feel like you got to chill. Kevin, let's take a quick break. And when we get back, I want to talk a little bit about some more advice that you have for the podcaster, just find the best advice, and also talk about your journey of finding guests, because it can be kind of hard to find guests. And I want to know how you find yours. So we'll be right back. Hey, my friend, as you know, this episode is sponsored by my company, growyourshow.com. We want you to be able to have the best tools at your disposal without costing you a whole arm and a leg. So right now you can get a free list of vetted equipment that like mics, mixers, webcams, sound treatment, editing software, everything that you need. I created the whole PDF with direct purchase links just to save you time and money, to help it be more convenient for you. So this free PDF will help you skip all the guesswork. If it's on there, it's vetted and approved by yours truly. And if it's not on there, it's probably not worth the money. So go ahead and get yours at growyourshow.com/PDF. Let's get back into the show. We are back with the Kevin Lowe from Grit, Grace, and Inspiration. That link is in the show notes. He is a coach, a mentor, helping people that have had something happen to them, like, for example, divorce or an injury, or some type of trauma where we need to figure out, how do we get past this? How do we move past this? And he coaches and mentors them. And he's got a podcast that supports his business. Already in this episode, we've talked about consistency. We've talked about how he went blind. We've talked about taking responsibility. We've talked about making sure that how are you going to record and produce on a regular basis, even when you don't want to? And is it important? And now I really want to understand like his journey through podcasting, what he's learned along the way. And Kevin, I wanted to find out, like, with you, when you started your podcast, what did you struggle with the most? Like, ultimately, what was the hardest? Whether it was because of being blind or not, what do you think is the hardest parts of starting a podcast?
I think for myself, it was kind of finding my voice. And so I would do these interviews, and the interviews are easy because they're basically a conversation. But as far as recording the intro, or if I did do a solo in the beginning, was finding that voice for myself. At the beginning, I was trying to script out everything. And then I'm trying to read a script. And so reading a script when you're blind basically means I'm utilizing my talking software on the computer. So I'm listening to it as I'm trying to read what it's telling me in my earbuds, and woo, baby, it just comes out not so great. And so I think that was the biggest thing that I struggled with, was getting comfortable on the microphone. And I think the biggest thing with that is what we said earlier, is putting in the reps. The only way that I got comfortable on the microphone is by doing it.
Yeah, I like that. And that is so true, because the more you do it, the more you practice, the better you get. And I'll say I've done like 800 episodes and I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
This interview today is not perfect. You know, if I do 4 or 5 of them today, none of them are going to be perfect. That's not what we are expecting. We're just expecting to be engaged and be good. Put in those reps and you just get better and better every month and every year and every next 100 episodes. And Kevin said this before. He was talking about consistency and being there. I think you're going to have your podcast for years, not just days. I hope you have it for years. So finding the voice, I think that's really important and quite impactful. Kevin, what about getting good guests for your podcast?
My biggest tip for young guests is, it's one thing to find the potential guest. I'm going to emphasize potential. Do not make the mistake of just booking a guest on your podcast. What I found in my process, what I started implementing is a preliminary phone call with any prospective guests, whether it's somebody who I meet through social media, who I think could be a really cool fit, or on one of the sites like podcastguest.com or PodMatch. I do not book a person on my show without having a preliminary phone call. Why is that important? Why? Because do not judge somebody by their bio, by their PodMatch profile. People can sound really cool, and then you get on the phone with them and you realize you guys just don't jive. And so that is the way of, I guess, weeding out potential guests, because, like I said, don't make the mistake. I did it and I failed miserably, of getting in a studio with somebody who I hadn't even talked to before. And I'm like, whoa, we just don't get along. And that's not good for anybody. As far as, actually finding guests, like I said, I'm a big supporter of sites like PodMatch. They have been incredible for getting really awesome guests for my show. And then other than that, is you would be surprised how many people say yes. I reached out to some pretty big people who I never really realized if I would get a response. Well, you send an invite to be on your podcast, that's exposure for them. And you do it in a really professional way where you come off as a professional. Generally, my response has been, very positive. And so I would say that is just act like you're not just this solo podcaster doing it out of your spare bedroom, but you're literally a media company and you're reaching out to people who you want to be on, have on your show, and do it like that. Other than that, like I said, just these other podcast guest directories.
Yeah. So you got a couple of pieces of advice. One is just letting us know that we'd be surprised how many people would say yes. Yep. Another one is about the preliminary call. And you mentioned that sometimes on the preliminary call, like you don't seem to get along. And I was going to ask you also, like, what makes you not get along? Right? What had made you on that one example or those examples not jive? What happened there exactly?
Most of the time, it's personality differences. I am very laid back, chill. If I get somebody on I've had some people I've had calls with who are very arrogant. They're very bold. If they get on that preliminary call, like this is totally ridiculous and a waste of their time, well, they are not a fit for me. And I used to skip it. If they said that, like they don't do preliminary calls, I'd be like, okay, well, you know what? Today I've passed up some pretty big guests because I'm like, okay, well, that's fine. Well, that's how I do things. So it's not a fit.
Okay. So even with big guest that you believe in, you still want to have a preliminary call just to make sure?
I do. And for myself, it just helps me to establish a rapport with this person, because not only do I ask them to give me a brief overview of what they want to get through on the podcast, all which while I'm taking notes, but also I then relieve time at the end to be sure, because I realize that a lot of people, they don't read everything. And so a lot of people get on these calls with me and they have no idea that I'm blind. And so I share that with them, and I share them the reason behind the podcast, because I want them to know that. And I want them to feel like they know me before we ever sit down to record.
Yeah. Hey, quick question on that. Before, you mentioned that every now and again, you'll have somebody who jumps on and gets ready to record with you, but they don't have the video and they sometimes can get upset.
Yes.
I'm wondering if on the preliminary call, if you're just letting people know that there's no video, or if you used to not, but then you added it, or if you always did and some people didn't listen, how does that work?
People don't listen and people don't read, man. That is just the truth of the matter. I can say it in a call, I can put it in an email, and they're used to doing what they're used to. And they get in their routine. And I've realized that people don't read, people don't listen. And it is what it is. So we just have to kind of burst their little bubble and like, no. You're just going to use your ears and your mouth today. Sorry. No eyes.
They're like, I put makeup on for this.
Exactly. And I get more of the time than not. I get the people who are like, oh my gosh, so I don't even have to do like my hair. It's like the ladies. I'm like, exactly. PJs and a ponytail is all you. So.
Yeah. I like that. Sometimes I have actually the opposite. So I always record video. Every now and again, somebody's wearing something they don't want to wear or not showing up on the camera. And I've got the same thing where it says in a lot of places, it says, we will record video. It even says, I agree to be wearing what I want to wear and how I want to look on video. And people are like, oh no, I wasn't expecting video. Like, I'm not ready for video. And it's like, dude, like, anyway, so that'll happen. So Kevin, let's just end here. Everything you've experienced, I think we could do lots of interviews with you. Everything that you've learned along the way after almost 200 episodes, what do you think would be your top advice, your best advice for my listener today?
Is that you do not have to do it all yourself. When I started a podcast, I began, like everybody, trying to figure out not only how to record, what things to use to record, but then, oh my gosh, editing. What am I going to do for editing? And I started to get stopped. And I started to realize you got to have the podcast logo and all of this stuff. Well, I'll tell you what, if there's something that stresses you out, if there's something that you're not good at, that you don't enjoy, there's somebody out there who loves it. And so I hired a podcast editor off of Fiverr. I hired a graphic designer to design my podcast logo off of Fiverr. Like I said, you don't have to do it all yourself. Get help if you need help. That is my biggest piece of advice, because the worst thing you can do is to let yourself get overwhelmed, frustrated, and then what happens? Nothing.
Yeah, I like that. I'm actually just processing it all the way, because there's a lot of people with their podcast or with their business or with their family or with their mental health. They think that I have to do it alone. Mm-hmm. They'll use reasons like the price of something. I did it with managing my own property. I had a triplex that I lived in. It's called house hacking. But this is years and years ago. It was like 2008 that I bought it. And I didn't want to pay a management company $300 a month, 10% of the rents of $3,000. I didn't want to pay a management company $300 when I was only supposed to be making $300. And so I did it myself. And arguably I learned a lot of different things, but honestly, mostly it cost me a shit ton more money to run it myself, learning the ropes while I was going to get that $300 a month. I was working around the clock, around my business, around my family, and extra hours. And I was getting definitely much less than minimum wage. And in my company, I could have done much better. And so by wasting the time doing the thing so that I could keep the $300, I frequently lost out on thousands of dollars a week because I wanted to do it myself. And I think that it's a good example, Kevin. Like, we don't have to do it ourselves. Best advice, he says, you don't have to do it yourself. He hired a company to do editing. He hired a person to do the artwork. It's not going to be easy for Kevin to do his own artwork, I don't think, or else I don't know something. But for you who's listening, like, maybe you think you can do it. Maybe it'll take you a lot of time. Maybe editing's hard. Maybe this is hard. But like, there's companies like mine, Grow Your Show, here available to support and offload all of that hard stuff, really ultimately so you can stay in your lane. You can focus and be the star of your show and make money. Like with Kevin, he makes money with coaching. He supports people going through stuff. He helps them, and he probably charges a good price for it. And that's where I think Kevin should be. And if you're listening, I think your lane should be your business. It should be your main focus. You don't need to learn how to manage your own property. You don't need to learn how to edit your own podcast. You can partner with somebody or a team that can do a lot of that for you. And if I would have done that back in 2008, I would have been in a way better position in 2011, because in those 3 years, I actually lost my property because I mismanaged it. I didn't pay an attorney to write a contract, so I wrote a shitty contract. And because I wrote the contract, it was so bad it wouldn't hold up. It didn't have the right language. And I lost out on a ton of money as a result. Vetting people. I mean, maybe you're not going to lose a ton of money on your podcast, but maybe you would. Maybe it's better that you have that for those reasons, but also for the reason of just being able to focus on your main thing and put all your efforts there. So I think it's been great being with Kevin today. I'll go over a couple of things that we learned. But again, you can find him. His website is in the show notes. You can scroll down, get his bio, get the link to his podcast. We talked about consistency. We talked about you've got a responsibility to your listener. We talked about putting out that content regularly, how to do it if it's hard. We talked about not having to do it yourself, finding your voice, and of course, having a preliminary phone call before anything else happens. Kevin, anything else you want to add?
Oh, man, I think you've nailed it all. The last thing I would say is just be sure you enjoy it. Love it. Podcasting has been the biggest surprise I never saw coming. I never realized it when I started it, that it would turn into what it did. And I can tell you this much, is that when I'm recording an episode, when I'm in the middle of an interview, and I'll find myself just thanking God for putting me in this position to be doing this interview, to be doing this thing. And I'm like, and that's how I know I'm where I'm supposed to be. Yeah. And so whatever that looks like for you is, I would encourage you, if you like it, if you love it, then do some more of it.
All right. If you're listening, and you are, you shouldn't even go anywhere. You can listen to the very next episode, which is a solo episode, me just pouring into you. I've already prepared something that I think you need, because I know what you're going through. I've been there too. So I got a solo episode. Don't go anywhere. I'll see you on the next episode.
You know, I really don't say this nearly enough. I don't mention this and I feel horrible because it's a great resource for you to be able to take your podcast to the next level. And it's simply a free resource that I don't need your email or anything. It's just a podcasting course that I created that is ended up putting in the very first 6 episodes of this podcast. So if you haven't checked it out, definitely going to want to just check out those first 6 episodes, see how they can help you improve your podcast, get in front of more people, and have a better result where you're making more money through the podcast, etc. So much can happen after you listen through episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So if you haven't done it, go do it now. And by the way, if you're subscribed, you'll keep hearing more great content. So to those of you who are, I'll see you on the next episode.